When Lyra discovers that her adoptive father Giovanni was killed by her two mates, Caspian and Marius, under the mistaken belief that he was a family murderer, her world is turned upside down. How will she face this shocking truth and the complex emotional entanglement with her destined mates? Don't go away. Subscribe to our channel to delve into the emotional entanglements and family secrets between Lyra and her two mates. 40. Lyra. Even though Caspian had made me come a few moments ago, my walls clenched continuously, reminding me of the emptiness. It intensified my need. And yet the cruel man was denying me what I needed the most, his knot. I needed it desperately to clench around. I had never had a knot in my life before. Very few wolves had knots. Mostly the alphas got a knot as soon as they met their mates. None of my previous lovers had knots. They had normal but impressive cocks, and I had been content with that much in the past. But presently I needed more. I didn't even know what knots felt like, and I had never seen a knot in my real life, but the burning desire I felt for a knot at that moment was utterly unmatched. "You're too weak to take my knot," Caspian told me, stroking my cheek so gently that it hurt. I heard the concern in his voice, yet the desire in his eyes was undeniable. He was holding himself back, but for what? I didn't give a fuck about being weak. All I needed was his knot. It seemed like the only solution to all my problems in the world right now. The clenching of my walls got worse, making me whimper in need. "Please." I tried. I would beg for it if that were how I would get it from him. I needed to have it anyhow. "I need to touch you. That's all," I pleaded, reaching for his pants. His eyes darkened considerably at my request, and this time when I unzipped his pants, he didn't say anything. He turned into a statue as I reached into his pants and touched his throbbing erection. The only response I got was feeling him grow tenser under my touch. I didn't care. I was going to get what I wanted by hook or by crook. I pulled out his raging erection, his enormous bulging knot, and stared at wonder. To say that he was impressive would have been an understatement, an insult to the glorious, breathtaking, and pussy-clenching cock. I stopped for a moment to admire the beauty of the whole thing: the veins, the slightly purple color of his cock tip, and the bulging knot at the base of his cock. All mine. My chest vibrated with a possessive growl. I looked him in the eyes as I wrapped my fingers around his length, feeling its hotness and heaviness. The girth was impressive, and it made my walls clench again, making my thighs quiver in need. "Fuck," was all I could say as I took him in hand, admiring his glory. His eyes were completely pitch black as he watched me. His fists clenched and unclenched on his side. He was constraining himself. "So good," I moaned, gently stroking his length before reaching his knot. I couldn't wrap my fingers around it all the way. It was a fascinating thing, hotter to touch and heavier. His cock twitched in my hands as I traced a vein on his knot, earning a tortured groan from him. I looked back at Caspian to find him panting hard with his head hanging back. His shoulders and the rest of the body looked tight with tension. I wanted to see his muscles, especially his tattooed chest and arms. The man was as beautiful as the cock and not attached to him. For a brief second it made me feel lucky to have him. I felt like I had everything and wouldn't need anything as long as I had him and his knot. My walls clenched and my pussy throbbed, agreeing with the thought. My whole body was in tune for once, and I wasn't fighting myself internally. It felt eternally blissful. "Lyra," he moaned my name when I gave him another slow stroke, taking my time to explore him. I reached into his pants with my other hand to take his balls, and I wasn't disappointed with what I found. He had big, heavy balls full of his seed. "All mine," I declared, and he growled, his body growing tenser while his breaths grew ragged. "I cannot wait to feel your knot inside me, pulsing like this while you fill me with your hot seed again and again," I whispered, stroking him faster and making him pant with need. My pussy was begging to be filled, but first I needed to taste his cum. "It's all yours, pussy cat. Use me all you want," he encouraged, worsening my heat tenfold. "Do you mean what you say?" I asked. I had to ask, and I was serious this time. This wasn't part of the dirty talk. "Can I really use you for my pleasure? You should know that I'm greedy when it comes to such things. I have a habit of taking more than I could give," I came up front while stroking him. Another tortured groan escaped his lips as he clasped his hands behind him, his breaths ragged and heavy. "Do what you must with my knot, Lyra. It's all yours. Without you there's nothing for me here. You can be as greedy as you want me." I have no problem in giving. I have already given my heart to you. You might as well have my knot and my seed in your cunt. It'd make me the happiest man alive on the planet, he told me between ragged breaths. I stroked him faster, taking him to his liberation. I was desperate for it more than him. His words made my desperation worse. I needed to see if he was telling the truth. He came moaning my name, and that sent an electric jolt through my body, the coil of pleasure tightening between my legs. I felt like a child at Christmas when he shot his load over my hand. I was quick to take him in my mouth and work it to extend his orgasm as long as possible. He tasted delicious, and in no time I cleaned him up. He fell back, panting as he watched me slowly lick his cock and his knot. His knot loosened briefly after his release, but it was soon back to bulging and pulsing, ready for another round. I didn't mind another round. I was already looking forward to it, but the throbbing between my legs seemed to get worse with every passing second until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I reached between my legs to gently ease the throbbing there. I stroked my clit a couple of times while I continued licking his cock, tracing his veins with my tongue tip and drawing small circles at his tip. I was being flipped out of nowhere until I was under Caspian, and he was hovering over me. A dark look on his face. "What were you doing down there, pussy cat?" he asked darkly, an edge to his voice that made my heart race. I was at a loss for words. "Were you touching yourself?" he pushed, his tone getting graver, right in front of me. He almost sounded offended by that, and for a moment I was scared. I shouldn't have done this, fuck. "Did you forget the no-touching rule, pussy cat?" he teased, his hand going between my legs to cup my sex heatedly. "Do I need to show you what happens when you touch yourself? Especially in the presence of your mate?" Yes, I choked out the answer because I had a death wish. 41. "Caspian, were you touching yourself?" I demanded, my nostrils flaring. The air in the bedroom was so thick with her arousal that I could taste her in the air. I wanted to taste her, but then she begged for me and I couldn't say no to her. But touching herself while she was right in front of me was where I drew the line. Right in front of me. "Did you forget the no-touching rule, pussy cat?" I growled, cupping her hot sex. She was wet and needy, making my wolf stir for her. He wanted to unite with her as soon as possible. Lyra squirmed under me, her face flushed with need. "Do I need to show you what happens when you touch yourself? Especially in the presence of your mate?" I asked, staring at her needy face. Her eyes were hooded with desire, her breaths heavy, and her skin hot to touch. She looked so beautiful like that. Her face was so vibrant, and her cheeks and eyes looked less hollow. She looked so full of life. So ready for me. "Yes," she whimpered, trying to close her thighs, but I didn't allow that. I smiled at her devilishly, feeling at the top of the world for having my mate whimpering for me. "Such a brave pussy cat," I purred, stroking her clit gently at first. Her back arched and a moan escaped her lips. Her eyes were dark and greedy with hunger. Hunger for me. Good. I sat up and maneuvered her in my lap, facing the huge mirror on the dresser. Behind it was the main camera, hidden from where everything could be seen in detail. I knew Matt was in the office watching. He spent most of his time there, not because of work but because of her. He watched her from there because she didn't want him around. That needed to change. "Spread your legs," I commanded, and she did so immediately. I ensured everything was reflected in the mirror perfectly to capture her glorious hole. "So fucking wet," I muttered, running my fingers through her wet folds, putting them on display for Marius. Why should he be exempted from pleasure? Lyra was his as much as she was mine. She was our mate, and even though I could have never imagined that I'd share a mate with my brother, it brought me the greatest joy in the world. Lyra was the best thing in the world, and Marius deserved to have her too. "Such a needy cunt," I commented, lathering her juices everywhere. I was tempted to bury my head there and lick every drop of it. I still remembered her taste on my tongue from yesterday. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. But I'd taste her later again. I needed to put on a show for my brother first. I needed to show him the treasure he was blessed with and in no time would get to possess. Lyra was a treasure meant to be shared. I was usually a greedy wolf when it came to sharing, but I loved to be generous with my brother. "So ready for my knot," I groaned, lingering around her hole that felt more than inviting, but I was still being careful. She whimpered at my words, clutching my arm painfully, her legs wide apart. "Do you want my knot?" I asked her, and she nodded desperately. "Not yet. You'd need to ride my fingers now," I told her, slowly slipping one finger inside her warm hole. Immediately my knot tightened, ready to burst, but I ignored it and focused on her warm hole. She clenched around my finger and squirmed in my lap. "Legs wide apart, pussy cat. I want your cunt to be on full display." "You've hidden yourself enough," I growled, adding another finger to her hole, and she took me in eagerly, hungry for more. This made me groan with need again. I was so close to flipping her on the bed and mounting her. I needed to feel her walls clench around me like they did around my fingers. I explored her cunt and found the rough spot behind her front wall. It was her most sensitive spot because as soon as I touched it, her whole body tensed, and she gave a tortured moan. Good. I started applying pressure on that spot, moving my fingers and hands both, making sloppy, wet noises with the movement. Lyra cried, holding on to me as if her life depended on it, and I sped up, creating more tension between her legs until she was quivering. When she seemed to have reached her peak, I slowed down and she cried in protest. I flicked her clit with my thumb while continuing to apply pressure inside her sensitive spot, maintaining the tension there, keeping her hanging on the edge. "Not so easily, pussy cat," I whispered in her ear, my free hand on her neck, pinning her head against my shoulder. "I need your cunt to get used to me to the point that you cannot satisfy yourself no matter how much you touch yourself. Only we would be able to make you come from now on whether you like it or not. Your cunt will only obey us because it belongs to us like all of you. Every time you need to come, you'd have to come to us. You'd have to depend on us, giving your freedom to coming only to us," I told her, working my fingers and hand faster. She was drenched with her wetness, and her walls were begging my fingers to let them clench, but not yet. I was teaching her cunt a lesson, and she needed to learn it soon. Needed to learn to obey. "Now tell me, pussy cat, would you touch yourself again?" I asked, fucking her with my finger and making those wet noises. Her pants were hard and fast, her legs quivering. "Caspian," she whimpered, her voice weak and breathy. "Answer me. Would you touch yourself again? If you do, then I'm going to torture you like this by keeping you at the edge and not letting you come. Please. I will not touch myself," she cried. I stopped flicking my fingers and pushed hard at her sensitive spot, making her squirt while she came with an intense orgasm. "Good girl," I praised her, letting her squirt more, shooting her juices towards the mirror. 42. Marius. I stared at the screen single-mindedly as Caspian spread her legs apart right in front of the main camera. My whole body tensed, and my knot throbbed painfully in my pants as his fingers explored her folds, spreading them to reveal everything. I knew Caspian was doing this for me. He had been sensing my stormy emotions for a long time. I was usually good at hiding my emotions and appearing stoic, but Caspian was always good at reading people, and he read me too well. Also, he knew about my heated interaction with Lyra yesterday. He was doing this for me, and as much as I'd have liked to tell him not to push our mate so early, I couldn't look away from the screen as he spread her bare in front of the camera, ensuring everything was on full display. I groaned, feeling like my knot was about to burst. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It all felt like a dream because I had been dreaming of doing those things to Lyra, and now my brother was giving me a peek at how things could be in reality. I watched him stroke her clit while fucking her with his fingers simultaneously. Caspian was exceptionally good with his fingers. Maybe it had something to do with him playing the piano well, or maybe it was his years of experience entertaining all the unmated pussies of the pack. Either way, he was good with his technique, and it worked all too well on Lyra. My heart lodged in my throat when I watched Lyra squirt towards the screen, her whole body shaking violently while she clung to Caspian's arm. Her eyes rolled back uncontrollably, and her face was flushed with so much color that, for once, she didn't look sick at all. I gritted my teeth, setting my cock free from my pants for the nth time today and stroking it to ease my knot. It was heavy and slowly turning purple from not being given attention it needed. I tried to drain myself occasionally, but it didn't help. It was because my knot needed Lyra desperately. It didn't help I had watched her take Caspian in her mouth, playing with him with such pleasure. I wanted to imagine her doing the same thing to me, but it made my situation worse. As I stared at the screen, it took me all the self-control in my body not to leave my office and go straight to her room and eat her out until she was begging me to give her my knot. When I spilt some of my seed and eased the tension from my knot, I decided it was enough. I needed to go on a run and think of something to sort this out. I was already at the end of my limit, and I needed to come up with a solution soon before I could die of blue balls. Lyra, I was utterly wasted after Caspian forced me to have those intense orgasms. It clouded my brain so much that I couldn't think of anything else while I lay on my bed with a racing heart. Meanwhile, Caspian stayed beside me, watching me fervently as his hands explored me. I was completely bare, and I should have felt self-conscious about it, but I was too high to think of that. "Are you there, pussycat?" he whispered, nudging his nose against my neck. I shuddered, but my wolf purred inside me. She was the most content, and even after being so wasted by an orgasm, I felt good. I felt better in a way I had never felt before. Felt like I could take over the world. "Yeah," I sighed, seeking his warmth. I had made him take off his shirt so I could look at his tattoos. All his corded muscles were covered with interesting tattoos. I loved his back the best. It was inked with a ferocious dragon. It made me wonder if Marius also had tattoos, but I pushed his thoughts out of my mind. "Do you feel tired? Does anything ache?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. It made it hard for me to believe that he had been whispering dirty things to me a few moments ago. "No," I answered, "I feel good." "That's my girl," he cooed, and even though I didn't want to, I melted. Caspian could make me turn into a puddle with just his words. I wondered what it'd feel like to have his knot. Mindlessly, I reached for his pants to see if his knot was still there. But he grabbed my hand before that. "It's enough for you for today, pussycat," he told me firmly, bringing my hand to his lips and pressing small kisses all over it. Even though it was my cybernetic arm, I felt his every kiss, raging the butterflies in my stomach. "You're not ready yet. I want you to be stronger," he told me hesitantly, his eyes thick with a motherly concern. It made me want to kiss his breath away. But at the same time, it made me want to scream in frustration. "I just want to touch you, Caspian," I whispered, and he chuckled. "It always starts with a touch," he said heatedly, and I frowned. "You don't have to worry about it. My knot is not going anywhere. Doesn't it feel painful?" I asked. I had a lot of questions about it, and instead of just imagining the answers, I decided to ask. "Doesn't it bother you?" "It does," he nodded, "but as I said, your comfort is more important than my pleasure. I can bear it." "For now," he muttered, uncertain. That meant that there were still a few cracks I could seep through. Good. I needed to find more of those cracks and try to get in. I desperately wanted to. "If you're feeling better, we can go out," he offered. "Yes, I want to go out." I grinned, excited to explore, to let my wolf out and let her play with his. I desperately needed that. He nodded before getting up from the bed and going to my closet to get some clothes out for the outdoors. "Not like I'd need them if we go for a run," I shrugged, stretching. "Can't be sure." "Better be prepared." He returned with thick sweaters and trousers before helping me in them. I wanted to giggle at how concentrated he looked while helping me get dressed. I could already imagine him wielding all his self-control. Once I was sufficiently dressed for the weather, he took me outside. Even though I wouldn't say I like snow, I was eager to explore the snowy landscape on this particular day. There's a frozen lake in the woods. It has this bacteria that turns colorful when the temperature drops. It looks beautiful during this time, he explained while leading me through a frozen path. I followed him like a lost child, holding his hand. "What else is here?" I asked him innocently, even though I knew most of the information about their pack. It didn't hurt to know more. "Well, there's this place a bit far away. We'd need to drive to get there. Or we can run there when the weather's nicer than today. It has a frozen waterfall and it's..." I continued to listen to him intently as he talked about his pack. It was a good day for me. 43. Lyra. 1 week later. My life at the brother's house fell into a routine soon. I'd wake up in the morning and have Caspian bring me breakfast. He'd talk to me and spend time with me before leaving for work. He'd come around in the evening and spend the rest of the night touching and talking to me. I was starting to get used to it, which was fine for now. Caspian demanded all my focus and attention whenever I was awake. The rest of the time I spent drifting in and out of sleep, especially after taking my meds. On nights after Caspian left, I always felt a presence in my room, watching and sometimes even touching me. I knew every time that it was Marius. He always came to see me in the darkest hour of the night and left silently like a shadow. Some days I stared back at him, my eyes half open. He'd sit at the foot of my bed and gaze at me longingly. Sometimes he touched me, but the other times he maintained the distance. No matter what, I could feel his anguish, his need, his desperation, his cravings, his every fucking emotion, and that drove me crazy. I wanted to stay mad at him, but my need for him was overpowering, and I wouldn't say I liked that. Caspian brought up Marius here and there in the conversations, telling me about him fondly, and I hated how I listened to all the information too closely, remembering every fucking thing. Apart from all this, nothing much happened. I mostly stayed in my room, resting or fooling around with Caspian. He tried to know more about me when we talked, but I always shut him down. It was not like I had much to share. Whatever I could share would leave nothing but a trail of disaster. In the meantime, I healed a lot. The scar on my head had completely healed, and I had grown some hair. My natural curly hair was starting to show, curling on my forehead and over my ear, giving me an innocent girly look. The curves on my body were returning, and I looked and felt a lot better, but still not the same as before. That would take a while, especially due to how things were progressing. However, after spending a week like that, I finally grew bored. Usually I was always working on a project, finding new ways to fuck people, extort money, get people killed, and all that good stuff. Now, with all my stuff gone, I had nothing. Not literally. I still had everything stored in a server in a city east of this place. But I doubted if I'd ever be able to go there soon. So, in the meantime, whenever I was awake and when Caspian wasn't around, this was uncommon, I took the opportunity to explore the house. I spent some time in Caspian's room, looking through his computer junk, which I found interesting. That was all. I could access most of the house, but the eastern wing was off limits. And that's where Marius lived and their main office was. Not that I was the kind of girl to follow the rules. One day when I found the house empty, I snuck into the eastern wing to explore. The first room I encountered was a cozy study that seemed less used. The next room was a bedroom. I didn't have to guess whom it belonged to. Marius. Of course. Even though we were not seeing eye to eye, I took the complete liberty to explore everything in his room, feeling childish. I opened random drawers of his dressers, jumped on his bed to check if it was as bouncy as mine. It was fucking rock hard. Ran through his closet, messed up some folded clothes, and ensured all his crisp shirts were crinkled. Satisfying. It was all good until I moved to the final door. At first it was locked, but then I returned to the study and found myself a paper pin. I picked the lock effortlessly and stepped in. I was shocked immediately. It was the biggest room in the house. One side of the room had two huge tables, one for each brother, and the other side of the room was plastered with security screens streaming live feeds of different rooms of the house. But half of the feed was covered with the view of my room from various angles. Only my bathroom didn't have a camera. Blood rushed to my face when I saw the clearest view in front of the bed, right where Caspian had made me squirt a few days ago. While he played with me in my room, someone sat here and watched everything. Who? Marius, of course. It had to be him. I shouldn't have been more surprised by this, but instead of enraging me, it turned me on. My wolf was already wondering how long Marius sat here and looked at me. She felt pity for him because he could only watch me but not touch me. I reminded my wolf that Marius had killed my father. He took away the only support I had in my life. I could never forgive him. I shouldn't ever feel any pity for him. He deserved it if he was hurting by staying away from me. But to my wolf, none of this mattered. She needed her other mate soon. She had been craving him more and more each day. I was afraid that if I didn't give her what she wanted soon enough, she'd force me to go into a heat. That'd be fucking terrible. I froze when I heard footsteps behind me, followed by an intense gaze burning on my back. I didn't have to look to know who it was. "What are you doing here, Lyra?" Marius demanded, not sounding too pleased to see me. 44. Lyra, what are you doing here, Lyra? Marius's voice boomed through the room, sending shivers down my spine. Even though I had been adamant not to bend to him, a part of me melted after hearing his voice. Even though he came at night to visit me, it seemed like part of my dreams. However, facing him in the daylight, being in the same room, and hearing his voice were entirely different things. My wolf was immediately awake, pacing to get closer to him. I turned around to face him. A stony expression shrouded his face. "You've been watching me from here," I accused, choosing not to beat around the bush. There was no use in doing that, and I wasn't the kind to do that. I was a straightforward, cutthroat girl. Brr. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. That mere act made my heart throb harder in my chest. Suddenly, I was aware of everything about him. The way he moved, the way his eyes washed over me, lingering a few extra seconds over my lips, how his body looked tense as if he was ready to leap over and take me. "Don't act like you don't like it," he shot back, dangerously stalking towards me. It was sexy and alluring and made me want to jump at him and devour him and fuck. Lyra, focus. I glared at him as he continued, "You know I watch you. That's why you roam around naked." I clenched my jaw because, well, he was right. Whenever you're with Caspian, you look for the cameras. Whenever you touch him, you look for the cameras. I know this is your game. His words burned on my skin like a hot lamp because he spoke the truth, and I didn't like it. I accused him of being a pervert, but secretly I liked it. Whenever I was awake in my room, I'd always wonder if someone was watching me, if he was watching me. Knowing that he had been watching me all along gave me a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong with me for liking this, but I didn't care. I was abnormal. That has been long ago established. "And didn't you ever feel pathetic?" I purred back, running a finger down his chest as he stood before me, too close until our toes touched. "Sitting here and watching your brother fuck you, mate, while all you could do is just watch and never get to touch your mate because she hates you. This is the only way you could ever see her." I picked out my words carefully so they'd leave the maximum impact on him. The darkening of his gaze told me that I had succeeded in triggering him. Good. I wanted to put him down, bully him, ruin him and all those things, but my wolf wanted only one thing: to climb him like a tree. And oh, that was another thing that I could do along with all the things I was planning to do. I gave him a wicked smile. I must be sick in the head to even think of such things in the first place. Maybe the explosion fucked me up. But most likely I was already fucked up. Out of nowhere, I was pinned to the wall, and his body slammed into me until I could feel every inch of him. Feeling his body against mine awakened a part of me. It made me feel alive with the realization that he was what I had been missing all these days. The big gaping hole in my heart was for him. Fuck him. "The last time you asked me if I could bring back dead to life," he started, his lips a few inches away from mine. If he wanted, he could claim my lips and kiss me to his heart's content, but he chose to speak instead. It had me thinking if we share a past I am unaware of. "I want to know. I'm fucking tired of these games, Lyra. Come clear and see me face to face. You cannot keep running away from me and pushing me away. We're bound to be together whether you like it or not." His words were dark and sharp, cutting right where I least expected them to cut. "Because we're mates," I challenged, feeling my blood thicken with rage. How dare he? "I can assure you, Marius, you wouldn't fuck me if you knew our past," I growled, wriggling against him. He had my hands pinned above my head. Otherwise, I would have loved to sink my nails in his throat and rode him like there was no tomorrow. The thought made heat curl between my legs until I could feel the faint pulse of need. How could I want to kill and fuck a person at the same time? "Try me, Lyra," he growled, pressing his body even more. I could feel his knot digging in my stomach. I was sure he could smell my arousal as well due to the way his nostrils flared. "Really?" I decided to test it out. "Go on," he pushed. "And what if you don't want to fuck me after that?" I probed, searching his face for any hints of what was going through his head. Even though I pretended not to give a fuck about him wanting to fuck me, it mattered to me. I wondered if knowing our past would end in a rejected bond. That would be pretty awful after all the things that I went through. "I'll fuck you no matter what," he stated with such confidence that I couldn't help but laugh at his face mockingly. This made me want to confess, but at the same time the fear of rejection was real. I should not have cared, but I couldn't stop myself anymore. With my body singing with need, my wolf craving him each day, and his nightly visits, I started feeling attached to him somewhere along the line. I'd be devastated to have it all severed, but I couldn't let him know that I was attached. "You want to know?" I gritted, my heart almost lodged in my throat when I finally confessed. "You killed my father, Marius, 45. "Marius, you want to know?" she asked, something dark and dangerous swirling in her eyes. Even though I had her pinned against the wall with my body, and I could smell her arousal thick in the air, the rage in her eyes was lethal. Her body and tongue spoke different languages. The same was the case with me, and it was because we had been staying apart for such a long time. The only thing we had shared so far was a kiss, which wasn't even a proper one. Our bodies were starving for each other and doing everything to force us to mate. It was frustrating, and I had been trying to deal with it for the past week. However, nothing could have prepared me for the following words: "You killed my father, Marius." I stilled. The silence in the room was deafening. Her words felt unreal for a minute, but then I kept repeating them in my head, churning them until they rang in my ears, and my whole body shook with the realization. Something heavy settled in my chest. The lethal look in Lyra's eyes intensified. She looked hungry for my blood and my knot at the same time. "Who was your father, Lyra?" I asked her. I had killed a lot of enemies in the past. I needed to know who exactly it was. She blinked at me, her eyes glossy with unshed tears, but I could see her trying extra hard not to cry. While I waited for her to answer, I went through all the wolves' names, but none seemed to have any links to Lyra. I always knew my enemies' families. I'd have known Lyra if that was the case. "He used to work with your family," she spat, her body quivering with fury under me. "Giovanni Williams." It was Caspian who spoke next. I was too consumed in my thoughts to have noticed him entering the office. "He was your father?" Caspian asked, stepping closer to us. I didn't let her go yet. I kept her pinned under me. "Yes," Lyra hissed. "How is that possible?" "He never had a mate and could not have a family," Caspian spoke. The same things were going through my head. I knew Giovanni since I was a boy. He had worked for our family for a long time. I always thought he was a lone man without a mate or a family. What Lyra was claiming was impossible. One couldn't have children without a mate unless they. "I was adopted," she hissed, wriggling under me to be set free. But I didn't let her go yet. Caspian stood shocked as he looked between the two of us. "I was orphaned at birth and he took me out of the system and gave me a proper life, but you took away the only person I had." She screamed at my face and I finally let her go, unable to bear her words. My heart was growing heavy in my chest, drowning deeper and deeper into guilt. I shouldn't have been feeling this because I killed Giovanni for a reason. A big serious reason. "And do you know what Giovanni did to us?" Caspian asked, a stern look on his face. "Giovanni was the one who got our mother and unborn sister killed," Caspian growled, his eyes red with rage. It was rare to see him in that state. The loss of our mother had affected him the most and the longest. He spent years lost in sorrow. I was sure he still missed her now and then, spending hours at her grave. I was 17 when our mother was killed, and he had been a mere boy. Days after our mother's death, my father killed himself, forcing me to take over the pack. It had been one of the darkest moments of my life. And since then I always craved Giovanni's blood. After our parents' death, I spent the next 5 years searching for Giovanni, and once I found him, I gave him the slowest and the most painful death. I remembered how he had begged for a swift death, but I had always laughed in his face. I had never felt an ounce of guilt for killing him until now. I had good reason to kill Giovanni, but I ruined Lyra's life. "Wait," I spoke, taking a step back. The chaos brewing inside me was too much, and glancing at Lyra and Caspian, I could tell they were consumed by the same, especially Caspian. "We need to talk this out," I stated. I needed to be the calm one no matter what. I had always been the one to take charge of such tense situations, but the storm inside me was a dangerous one. "Fuck you too." Lyra screamed and stormed out of the room. I wanted to follow after her, but I stopped myself from doing so. I didn't trust myself enough in that situation. Instead, I turned my attention to Caspian. His eyes were blazing red, his whole body tense. He was going through the motions again, and it had always been the worst for him. "Caspian, we need to sort this out calmly," I told him. "I'm not angry at her," he spoke, his voice deep. "It's not her fault that someone like Giovanni adopted her, but I know," I assured him before he could complete the sentence. I could feel everything he was going through. "We need to tread with caution. We cannot distress her." "It's not her fault," I told Caspian, but it was mostly for me because the thoughts racing through my head were dark. "It's not your fault either," he pushed. "You killed Giovanni because he ruined us," Caspian spoke, reading my mind. He had always been good at sensing my suppressed emotions. "You did what was necessary to be done." "I know," I muttered, still feeling a small amount of guilt. "I'll go talk to her," Caspian offered. "No, leave her alone for a while," I told him, glancing at the screen. She was back in her room, hiding under the covers. "We'll have a serious talk at the dinner." 46. Caspian. I usually spent most of the day at home looking after Lyra, but today I stayed outside till dark, running the whole parameter of our pack boundary many times to keep myself occupied. I was afraid if I didn't do anything to keep myself distracted, I'd end up going to our family grave. I didn't want to go there, especially with all the thoughts running through my head. That'd aggravate me more instead of calming me down. I needed to be calm for tonight. We were going to talk this through. I was hoping so. Even though Lyra was completely innocent in this whole ordeal, her being related to Giovanni crushed a part of me. Of all the people, she had to be related to the murderer of our parents. Of course, it wasn't her fault. However, these made things even more complicated, especially for Marius. I could now start to see why she had been so avoidant of Marius and seemed to want to do nothing with him. But at the same time, he wasn't at fault either. Marius didn't kill Lyra's father. No. He killed our parents' murderer. It happened to be Giovanni, and we were unaware of her. My head hurt thinking about all these things. I had been running all day in the snow to keep myself preoccupied, from visiting our family grave or going home and talking to Lyra about it. I was more eager to do the latter, but Marius had strictly told me to give her space. He had been right in telling me to do so because my emotions were all over the place, and I didn't know how I'd have reacted to Lyra. It could have created a bigger mess. It was a good thing I wasn't home, but at the same time my wolf was eager to go home and embrace our mate. But I was anxious to go back. As much as I wanted to see Lyra, a part of me wanted to hide away for a while and mope until all my stormy emotions were gone. When it grew late, I knew that I had to go back. I couldn't continue avoiding this forever. Marius was waiting for me at home, and I wished Lyra was waiting for me too. Dread washed over me as I stepped on our porch. When I stepped inside the house, I could sense Marius in his office, slugging while Lyra was still in her room. Silently, I headed to my room and showered, composing myself. A sharp knock on my bedroom door made me step out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around my hips. It was Marius, a stern look on his face as he regarded me. He knew this affected me the worst. I didn't take the untimely departure of my parents well. I went into deep depression and almost lost my wolf for a few years. It took me various years of therapy to be as normal as I could. My wolf took longer to return, but once it returned, I did everything I could to keep it. Marius knew all about it. Not that the loss hadn't affected him much. He was equally crushed, if not more, forced to abandon his childhood soon and take on the crushing responsibilities of the pack at such a tender age and without much training. But he grieved in his own way by hunting all the people related to the murder and torturing them. Instead of storing his anguish inside and slowly slipping into darkness like me, he put others into darkness. This was how he kept it all intact on the hardest of days. This was how the tragedy changed us forever. "Dinner is served," he told me curtly. I glanced towards Lyra's bedroom door and wondered what she was doing. My body craved her desperately after not seeing her for the whole day. "I'll speak to her," Marius told me, reading my mind. I nodded and threw on gray pants, not caring to put on a shirt, and headed downstairs. Behind me, I heard Marius knocking on Lyra's door and telling her to come downstairs. I went straight to the kitchen to keep myself busy. An old lady of the pack was our chef. She was still in the kitchen, finishing up when I stepped there. I silently did some chores, helping her even though she tried to send me away. In the hallway, I heard Marius setting the dinner table. I carried the dishes to the table and silently served them while Marius sat at the head of the table, his hands under his chin, waiting. I took my seat but hadn't touched the food yet. I doubted if I'd be able to eat at all. It was after a long time we were having dinner like this. After Lyra's arrival, I got used to having dinner with her while Marius ate his in the office. He spent most of his time there watching her. We glanced at each other, waiting for Lyra. "What did she do all day?" I asked, leaning back and crossing my arms on my chest. My hair was still wet from the shower, and a few drops dripped down my shoulder now and then. "She slept for most of the day. The last I checked, she was trimming her new-grown hair," he answered, glancing at his watch. A frown hung on his face. I wasn't expecting her to show up, but then I heard her footsteps climbing downstairs. She entered the living room, a blank look on her face. She glanced at the two of us before sitting at the opposite end of the table far away from us. I noticed her newly trimmed hair. She had grown her hair pretty quickly and now had a pixie cut. It made her look like a teenager but hid the scars on her head. She was starting to look healthier day by day. Thank you for coming, Lyra, Marius greeted her, but she gave him a chilling look. Meanwhile, she avoided looking at me directly. How are you feeling now? He asked. Terrible, she hissed. A flash of rage lit her eyes. Marius tensed but remained calm on the surface. I clenched my jaw, biting back my words. It's not her fault. I reminded myself again and again. I'm sorry for your loss. Your feelings are completely valid, he started. Are you sorry for killing Giovanni? She asked, injecting the whole room with thick tension. 47. Marius. Are you sorry for killing Giovanni? Lyra asked me sharply. Her eyes filled with rage and loath, the two things I couldn't bear looking at anymore. It broke a part of me every time. Hurt my wolf and deepened the wound in my chest. I'm sorry for killing your father, Lyra. I stated out loud and clear so that everything was out in the clear. I wanted this to be as straightforward as possible. It was all I had been preparing for the whole day, but I still felt anxious. The storm of emotions raging in Lyra's eyes made me feel like I was walking a tightrope. Are you sorry just because he was my father? She asked, an assertive look in her eyes. I could say a bunch of stuff to her to beat around the bush, but I chose to speak the truth instead. Yes, I answered honestly. I'm sorry that Giovanni turned out to be your father. But I'm not sorry for killing my parents' murderer. Something strong and dangerous raged in her eyes. Her jaw was set as she tacked me with her eyes, her body tight with tension. He was all I had, she gritted, her voice heavy with dark emotions. He took me out of the system, and right when I was starting to have a normal life I was put back into it. I'm sorry for just shut the fuck up. She roared, slamming her arms on the table and standing up. I twitched, not because of the way she snapped but primarily due to concern for her hands. She slammed them way too hard. I was hoping they didn't hurt. Do you know how it feels like to hate a place and wish to never go back, but then one day, someone pulls you out of that place only for you to end up back there again? She asked, an angry tear running down her cheek. My hands itched to touch her, to soothe her, to do everything to calm her down, but I couldn't move. I could feel Caspian's emotions too. He wanted to get closer to her and hold her, but not yet. I needed to hear what she wanted to say without reacting. Whatever the case was, I accepted that she had it worse than me. Even after our parents were gone, we brothers still had some form of support system in place to deal with our grief, but she didn't have that. I wanted to say everything to her but couldn't find the words to speak. A lump was building in my throat, constraining my speech. But even if I could talk, I wasn't sure if my words would have made any difference. So I chose to listen as she went on. I woke up one day and found myself back in the orphanage I hated the most. It felt like I had been dreaming all the time I spent at Giovanni's house, calling him father. At first I thought he abandoned me like every other person did. It hurt a lot because I liked him. I had been with him for years and he never treated me like I was a pest. For him to be gone so abruptly shattered me deep down. I started thinking that something was wrong with me. But then months later they found him dead. They didn't let me see him for a last time because his body was severely mangled. I couldn't have been more devastated. I listened wordlessly, feeling that guilt seep deep into my heart like poison. A part of me wanted to burst out of the glass door and disappear into the snowy night. But I couldn't escape this. I needed to face the reality. I needed to face her wrath. Only then could I sort this situation out. I cannot bring back Giovanni, but if there's a way I could ease you, then leave me alone, she snapped. The only reason why I ever tolerate you is because of this stupid mate bond. In reality, I don't want to do anything with you too. Feels like a curse being mated to you too. Then you have to live with the curse, Caspian spoke up this time. He had been quiet all along, but the darkness in his voice told me that he was done sitting silent and watching it unfold. If it feels like a curse, then you are cursed. There's no way I'm letting you leave us. You're not the only one who fucking suffered in this, Lyra. We lost our parents too. Caspian, I spoke, calling him to stop. I didn't want to make this a screaming match. Lyra glanced between the two of us with a hurt look on her face as if it were her against us. Before I could say anything more, she turned around and left. Caspian growled, but I reached out and dug my fingers into his shoulder to stop him before he could go after her. We need to take our time with her, I told her. Doesn't it bother you, brother? He asked me, quivering with anger. I rarely saw him in such rage, and it never ended in anything good. Does, but we need to be patient. She's still healing. She'll come to understand, I assured him. How are you so sure? He shot back. She was asking to be left alone. What if she leaves us? He asked, and for a moment I didn't have an answer to those questions. What if Lyra chose to leave us? I'd be devastated for sure. I'd be ruined, and most likely, I'd lose my wolf insanity. I couldn't let that happen. I'll not allow her to leave us, I told him firmly. She'll stay with us no matter what our past is. I want to focus on the future. What if she doesn't want to? He asked, and his question was valid, but I wasn't ready to face those questions yet. I didn't want to force Lyra into anything, but at the same time I was too selfish to let her go. She needs time, I assured, getting up to leave. I hadn't touched anything on the table at all. I didn't have any appetite. Go train for the night. It'll help you take your mind off, I told Caspian before returning to the office to watch her. 48. Lyra back into my room. I slipped under the covers and stayed there for hours hiding. I silently cried there for a while, unable to stop myself. The memories from those dark days came back in waves, shaking me to the core. It was all I could think of for the rest of the night. I remembered the day when the officials from the orphanage had shown up to take me back. I had never felt such a soul-crushing disappointment and hurt before. I felt cosmically abandoned, as if no one ever wanted me and would never want me ever. It was the first time I had felt something so intensely. Sure, I had been abandoned by two lovers as they found their mates, but feeling that intense emotion for the first time while I was still a kid changed me forever. But apart from my pain, I kept thinking of Caspian's words as well. He had said that he had lost his wolf due to the shock. That must have been really terrible. It was rare to survive after someone lost their wolf. It must have been hell for him to have something like that happen to him as a kid. Even if I didn't want to, I was starting to feel guilty for screaming at him and leaving like that. After all, they had lost their parents and unborn sister so abruptly. It must have been pretty devastating for them too. I wasn't aware of this fact before, but knowing it now changed some things despite my dislike. I wanted to hate those brothers brutally and destroy them, but day by day I found more reasons to not do terrible things to them. My heart ached for them after knowing the truth, especially after what Caspian told me. I wasn't the only person affected by this. They had suffered a great deal too and were continuing to suffer. I got too blinded by my suffering and the thirst for revenge. I didn't realize when I drifted to sleep while thinking about the three of us. It was a messy situation, and as much as I wanted to think rationally, all the years of emotions I had been bottling away were surfacing, and it was ugly. I didn't want to face the brother and make a fool of myself. I needed to calm down and think more and dream. That's quite a lot, but I hear you, the moon goddess's voice floated behind me, making my hair stand up at the nape of my neck. Thanks for listening, I sighed deeply. I will see what I can do, she told me, her voice hardened all of a sudden. But I have a condition. I froze. Condition? Of course. What did I expect? That I could just summon a goddess and ask her for a mate, and that will happen all like that. No. Everything came at a price. What condition? I asked. It's simple but might not be easy for you. She trailed off, her voice somewhat unfocused. Whatever I must give you, you shall accept without a question. I found her words strange. Everyone accepted their mates. I had hardly heard of rejection. They happened, but they were pretty rare. For a moment I wondered if I'd become one of those unfortunate ones. My heart ached. No. I wouldn't be able to bear that. The idea scared me. I will accept my mate, I promised the moon goddess. You must keep your word, she stated darkly, stepping closer to me. A chill ran down my spine, followed by a moment of weakness, making me drop to my knees. I will, I breathed, slowly losing my vision. Sleep, my child. Get all the sleep you can before they find you, she whispered before disappearing. I gasped for air as if someone had been holding me underwater for a long time. However, no matter how hard I tried to breathe, my lungs didn't seem to be in a mood to cooperate. It felt like my lungs were collapsing on me. I couldn't focus on anything but how I felt out of breath, and it felt like I was drowning even after being outside of the water. A lot of commotion happened around me before someone tried to cover my nose. I fought them hard, screaming at the top of my lungs. Whoever they were, they didn't want me to breathe, and I wouldn't allow that. I punched my cybernetic hand straight to their face and heard a loud thump, but soon after, more arms were holding me down before a mask was put on my face. As soon as my breathing eased, I stopped struggling. My lungs were working again and I felt like I could think straight, as if the world wasn't closing in on me, making me feel claustrophobic. When my vision cleared, I saw several nurses and some docs from the Pack's hospital in my room, surrounding my bed. Along with them were Caspian and Marius, looking at me with eyes full of concern while one of the doctors explained something to them with a severe face. I tried to tune in, but all I heard from the conversation were a few words: lungs, fire, smoke, and many other things. But that wasn't what I was focused on. I was focused on the brothers while the dream I was seeing came back to me. I had promised the moon goddess that I'd accept whatever she chose for me. I had forgotten that part. I didn't keep my word. I tried to go against her. And all this was nothing but her way of punishing me for not holding my side of the bargain. Suddenly everything made sense. I was the one to do this to myself. Of course. Who else could it be? It was on my shoulders now to clean this up. Or else things could worsen. 49. Lyra. When I woke up the time, it was sometime in the afternoon, and I was still plugged into some machines, making me remember my terrible time at the hospital. Don't do that. Marius's sharp command made me stop when I tried to remove the oxygen mask. It felt uncomfortable against my face. I glanced at Marius to find him sitting by my bed, reading some papers with a grim face. Nonetheless, I went forward and took the mask off. He gave me a warning growl, but I didn't stop. Without the mask, I could breathe fine again. I concentrated on my breaths, checking if something in my body felt out of place. Meanwhile, I heard shuffling on my side and felt Marius move closer to me. Put the mask back, he urged. I can breathe, I frowned. You abruptly stopped breathing last night when I came to check up on you, he told me, running his fingers gently through my short hair. I wanted to fight it off but accepted his touch with a deep sigh. His words reminded me of the dream I had last night. It wasn't a dream but more like a flashback of me asking the moon goddess for mates. I remembered everything vividly now, making me realize some things I had forgotten. Especially, me promising the moon goddess to accept whoever she chose for me. I dipped on that part and well, she punished me in return. I can breathe now, I told him. Take these things off me. I hate them, he narrowed his eyes at me. His hair looked messy, as if he had repeatedly run his fingers through them. He had salt and pepper stubble growing on his face, making him look mature beyond his age. I stared at him for a few seconds, unable to recognize him. He seemed to have aged 10 years since I first saw him in the hotel that night. Damn, I must have been giving the brothers a tough time. That's not happening until your vitals are stable, he told me gruffly, sounding like a brooding guardian, and despite my dislike for him, it softened a part of me. He looked genuinely worried about me, which reminded me of Caspian. Though Caspian looked at me with that motherly worry while Marius was looking at me as if I was one of his troubled children, constantly breaking all the rules. Despite all this, he couldn't bring himself to punish me. It almost made me smile. Didn't I ask for someone like this? I recalled. Now that I think of it, I had asked for a long list of qualities, most of them opposite of each other. Maybe that's why the moon goddess gave me two mates, the brothers who were day and night in comparison but still oddly similar. They were like the two sides of the same coin. Where's Caspian? I had to ask because it was usually him looking after me while Marius was the one sulking away somewhere, avoiding me. However, a part of me was happy to wake up to him. I had neglected him a lot, pushed him away and berated him at every chance. Seeing him so worried over me made me feel guilty for treating him like that. Maybe I should start giving people the benefit of the doubt sometimes. He's out dealing with stuff, Marius muttered, but that's not important. Do you want him instead of me? He asked. Even though he had asked the question casually, I sensed the heaviness of emotions in his voice. He looked at me as if he meant business, but his eyes searched my face for something acceptance. It tugged at my heart. Even though I still found it hard to accept him, much less forgive him, I felt like crap for treating him like crap. He was my mate too, and my wolf craved for him. I was sure his wolf craved for me too, after all the things he'd seen me through. Pushing him away felt cruel, even if I saw him as my enemy. Sometimes you ought to show kindness to your enemies too. No, I want you to stay, I told him, my voice a mere whisper. My words visibly loosened his shoulders, and he nodded. He stared at my face for a couple more seconds and began. About last night's dinner. Let's not talk about that right now, I dismissed. Okay. But is that why Caspian is avoiding me? I had to ask because his absence was irking me as well. For once, my wolf needed her mates, and Caspian being away at such an hour felt odd. Something was up. I knew the brothers' schedule by heart, and usually at this time Caspian was by my side. Be honest, I shot before he could feed me a bullshit answer. Well, he likes to deal with his emotions privately, but I assure you, he's away at this time for work purposes only, Marius assured me. I narrowed my eyes at him. What happened? I pushed. I smell some bullshit in that answer of yours. He cocked an eyebrow at me and gave me a stern look. It's pack-related work. Nothing concerning you. He tried to dismiss me and go back to his seat, but I grabbed his arm right on time, and immediately, a strong surge of sparks washed all over my body. The stupid heart monitor started beating rapidly, indicating my racing heart. I mentally cursed at it and trained my eyes on Marius' face. Please tell me. I want to know where Caspian is, I asked him. He's away, but if you really want him, say it, Lyra. You don't have to pretend to be with me, he told me up front, making me stop. If only that damned heart monitor weren't beeping away with the speed of a racing car, I'd have replied to him with some colorful words. Why can't I want both of you at the same time? I shot, glaring at him. I tried to be softer with him, but he made it harder. He froze for a second, searching my face before taking my hand and stroking his thumb gently on the back. Caspian is dealing with work. I'm not lying to you, Lyra. I'll call him here if you want, he offered much more kindly this time. The way he was stroking his thumb at the back of my hand was doing something to me because I wanted to hell at him and kiss him at the same time. Okay, I settled this time, no longer wanting to ruin the moment. Will I be going back to the hospital? I had to ask because the machines were grinding on my nerves, especially that beeping heart monitor. If your wolf doesn't take over the healing quick enough, then I'm afraid you'll have to be taken to the hospital again. He told me sincerely, taking a seat by my side, his hand never leaving mine. I liked that. It was the first interaction I had with Marius without being in any conflict. Well, kind of. I didn't count the shit I tried to start a few moments ago. I don't want that, I frowned. I hate hospitals. I don't want to see you like this too, he told me gently, but your wolf is weak, Lyra. Until she's strong, things are going to be like this. We brought you home because we thought having us nearby would encourage your wolf to heal faster. Seems like it's not working so far. Don't blame her, I'm not blaming her. I want her to be well, he answered, his eyes softening over my face, and even though I didn't want to, I felt myself melting under his gaze. I want to see you healthy and happy again. You say this even after our past. I had to ask even though I dismissed any conversation regarding this topic earlier. Regardless of our situation, I'd always want to see you healthy and happy, Lyra, he spoke, his other hand going back to my hair, and I didn't fight it. I could feel it from the way he was moving closer and closer to me that he needed to touch me. Physical touch seemed to be his love language, and it warmed me to know that. I'd do anything not to go back to hospital, I told him. His eyes darkened. You know what you need to do not to get back to the hospital, he told me, and I immediately knew what he was talking about to stop fighting the bond. It was what was making my wolf weaker. No matter how much I loathed the brothers for our past, my wolf still needed her mates. They were all that mattered to him. She wanted to fulfill our bond soon and carry their pups. I was still very skeptical of the two though, but more or less I was slowly starting to give in. I didn't like it, but I had to do it, no other option. My crappy health made me more dependent on the brothers, and I couldn't help but think that the moon goddess was at play here. She had given me the mates, and now she wanted me to be with them. I know, I sighed. He bent down until his face was inches away from mine. Up this close I could see all those emotions swirling inside his eyes. He was carrying a storm inside him, and I wanted to be lost in it. I'm sorry, Lyra, he spoke, his voice was a rough whisper. I know my actions caused you suffering in the past. I cannot go back and undo them, but I promise you I will take care of you till my last breath. Thanks for watching. If you want to know more, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new content.